To reap the rewards, you must review your investments.
Okay, yes. And do we use you to help us do that?
You can use anyone. I think the game today is how do you efficiently manage not just your cash flow, but how do you do it in a tax efficient way so that you're not losing a big chunk of it?
You work with some really successful people who have a lot of money, but they just really don't know the financial side of things. I mean, they could be a world-class engineer and make all this money in their career and then not know where to put their money and how to manage it. Why do you think that is that they don't get that education?
I feel like it's overwhelming. And a lot of times people are just like, where do I even begin? Welcome to the Retire and Thrive podcast. In fact, welcome back, I should say. If you watched the first episode, that was all about introducing this podcast. So we're not going to count every episode, but we're now on to episode 2, Kamie.
Yes, and we are so excited. We are so happy to have episode 2 here. This is something that we've started to help many people of all ages, but really we're focusing on retirement and thriving throughout that retirement. Dan is the expert here. I'm just here to ask some questions. Dan actually wrote a book, and he has 7 lessons that we are going to dig into a little bit today. First, I have to ask, why'd you pick 7, Dan?
They always say an odd number is a good thing.
Oh, okay. Well, 7 is Joe Mauer's number. So
I know it's Joe Mauer's number. Of course, everybody knows it's Joe Mauer's number. Being the avid. I don't know if you're the biggest Twins fan, but
Very
you're at least
large.
in the top 5, right?
Okay. Yes. I'm a huge Minnesota Twins fan. And yes, that's why I'm a big Joe Mauer fan. And I like money too, Dan, just like a lot of people. So that's why I'm so excited to learn a little bit more about these 7 lessons. I've read the book, but it's always a good refresher to look at some of these lessons because they are so important. And they're things that you've learned over your career, I assume, and you picked out the 7 that are most important.
Right. And to answer your question, the 7 actually, when I sat down and wrote the book, these 7 seemed to be the most common questions that people asked as they were approaching retirement. And so as I was writing the book, which was kind of a labor of love over a couple of years, the intent was, what are the things that really people are struggling with when they retire and some of the common questions?
All right, so let's dig into it. Let's start with lesson 1. What do you have for us, Dan?
I think the first lesson is, again, we touched on it just real briefly on the first episode, but it's enjoying the fruits of your labor.
So what does that mean exactly? Because we all work hard. Many of us work hard our entire lives. And then it's time to, sit back and enjoy. And it's probably changed a little bit over the years too, which you've noticed. I mean, we look at your parents, my parents, and they had children younger, they got married younger, and things are changing a little bit. I look at a lot of my friends, I'm in my 30s, they're not even married and don't have kids yet. So, which is a little bit scary because then they'll be older when their kids graduate and go to college. So I know that's changed quite a bit, but what does that mean exactly to enjoy the fruits of your labor?
Yeah. And again, I think, as you said, demographics have changed over the years and it will evolve. And I think enjoying the fruits of your labor is just kind of, as the name implies, I know it's a little bit of a standard phrase, but we do go through life and we're trying to accumulate so that someday we can retire. And for the younger group in the audience or the viewers, I look at, in the financial world, there's really 3 financial hurdles. The first and foremost is if you have a home, as you approach retirement, we'd like to have that home paid for. So I always tell people, button down your real estate, button down your home, get that kind of tied in. Second thing is, if you do have kids, and it's important, set aside some college funds.
Yeah.
And everybody's varies there. Some people want to help. Some say, hey, I didn't get it. And again, that's fine. And then the third thing that we spend 95% of our time is retirement. And so it does mean different things to different people based on their age. And as you indicated, the generations have changed over time. And let's be honest. We now have people that are actually living longer in retirement than they were in their working years because the life expectancies have continued to, extend.
Yeah. Overall health is getting better. Technology is getting better. And we have more opportunities to thrive, which is a big focus of this podcast. And we touched on it in episode 1, but I want to ask it again, Dan. What makes this podcast different from all the other financial podcasts and the other options to learn about your finances?
Great question. I think the main thing is, the book was written to thrive, not just to retire. Mm-hmm. And so it's embracing that next chapter. It's taking all of those years that you've worked that hard ultimately to thrive in retirement. And thrive could mean everything from knocking off those bucket lists, those hobbies, whether, a common one for us, we always hear, and I always joke around with clients, they always say, I want to work on my golf handicap. And a year later, I'm like, so how's that handicap coming? I don't know why, but my handicap actually went up, they'll say. And so, and it might just be spending more time with family, or it might be travel, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. All right. We're knocking out these lessons here. 7 lessons. We're on lesson 2. What is it, Dan?
Lesson number 2 is, to reap the rewards, you must review your investments.
Okay, yes. And do we use you to help us do that?
You can use anyone. I mean, this show is not about me. This is truly about helping people make good decisions with their money and, of course, thriving in retirement.
Yeah, so you must deal with a lot of clients who maybe haven't reviewed their finances and they don't know where they're at financially.
You would be surprised.
Yeah.
We get clients that
I feel like maybe I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, it is surprising. It's actually a little bit sad because the joke is always you spend more time planning your vacation than you do planning your retirement.
Yeah.
And obviously vacations are important, as you and I both know.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think we get clients of ours that maybe their whole focus is on their retirement plan at work, whether it's a 403B or 401k. And I don't know the number, but I would say probably a third of the people that come in here that we sit down with for the first time say, well, I haven't changed it in 20 years.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm being a little smart. And I say, so your life has never changed? Your risk tolerance hasn't changed? Your outlook hasn't changed? So yeah, that's lesson number 2, is that it's important to continuously look at it, whether you're in your 30s or whether you're in your 50s.
Yeah. And so again, everything you say, I'm just like, this is a whole episode. We can dig way into that. And we're going to, because we're going to continue this podcast and we have a lot of episodes ahead. And so we hope that you'll join us for that as well. Let's get to lesson number 3.
Lesson number 3 is a little bit of a tongue twister.
Okay.
And so you kind of have to say it slowly.
Mm-hmm.
But lesson
You're going to nail it.
Well, we'll try. We'll see how this goes. I only have freedom when my cash flows freely.
Okay. Yes.
So not only a tongue twister,
Seems
but
valid.
maybe a little confusing. Say, well, what's freedom and cash flows freely?
Yeah, but it makes sense when you think about it. Why did you pick that as a lesson?
So when it comes to retirement, it's not an asset game. It's a cash flow game. In other words, if you've built up $1 million portfolio or $2 million portfolio, whatever the number is, you don't live off of the asset itself. You live off of the income that it generates.
Right.
So we always look at things differently from the standpoint of, everything from Social Security to rental properties to pensions or other assets. Those, Kamie, consistently come in typically on a monthly basis. And you don't have to worry about those. But if you've got a portfolio, you need to figure out, how do I turn this portfolio from, in my earlier years, from a growth stage to more of an income stage? How do I get income from this portfolio?
And you touched on earlier about if you own a home, becoming free of your home, not paying that mortgage, not paying that interest to the bank each month. That is something that you think is really important?
Yeah, because I think when I look at someone owning their home, and again, it's all different numbers here, but just assume that you've got a mortgage payment of $2,000 a month and you're now 65 and you're retired, and maybe the mortgage will be paid off at age 70, maybe in 5 years. The challenge is that $2,000 a month, we have to pull from somewhere, whether it's from your portfolio or whether that's from your pension or from your Social Security. So that's part of it. When you do retire, it's important to have as less expenditures as necessary, specifically mortgages, car payments, things of that nature, because we do have to replenish that income somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah. And I think that can apply to people all across the board of all ages, not just retirement. If you can try and pay your house payment down each month, even throwing a little money in there left and right, that's always a good thing. All right, where are we at? Number 4, Carlos Correa. Shortstop for the Twins.
Of course you would know that.
What is lesson number 4 here, though?
I will thrive as I understand my financial picture.
Okay.
Very broad.
Yes.
But in the book, we get very granular.
Okay. Yeah, when I think of that, I'm like, oh, that's very broad. And it seems like absolutely that makes sense. Why is that something that you felt important to be a lesson?
We're big in educating people. And it doesn't matter what line of work you were in, what career path, what your knowledge base in. We work with all shapes and sizes of knowledge bases. And if you don't understand what's going on, it's really hard to make informed decisions. And I feel like that's the way it is for me personally as well, whether it's, I need to at least understand some of the basics. Again, full disclosure here, We have a lot of younger people that work for us. And I almost feel like I'm starting to get a little bit extinct when it comes to this planning and the software, and they're running circles around me.
Sure.
And but I have to at least have some sort of knowledge about what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the advantages of hiring a financial advisor is they have access to some of the software that maybe the average consumer or investor doesn't have, but they don't necessarily have to know all the intricacies of what levers to pull at what time, or how do we rebalance? Do we add different asset classes? They don't have to worry about any of that, but they need to know at least enough about what's going on so that they can keep their advisor on track.
Yeah. You work with a lot of clients. Do you deal with people who come in and have no idea what's going on with their finances?
We do. I'm not sure what the number is, percentage, but it's probably higher than it should be.
Sure.
And I think what challenges me sometimes is we work with a lot of people that are approaching retirement, and we'll ask them specific questions like, well, how did you decide to put so much of this in your pre-tax retirement of your 401k versus in the Roth component? And oftentimes they're like, well, that's what my coworker did.
Right.
Or that's what my manager said to do.
Yeah.
And obviously being a little bit facetious, but I'll come back and say, do they have the same financial picture as you?
Right. So how do you help? I mean, you mentioned why you kind of think that is because they don't really know. And so they just go off of what they've learned from other people that maybe aren't as educated. But why do you think that is the case for some people? Because you have mentioned you work with some really successful people who have a lot of money, but they just really don't know the financial side of things. I mean, they could be a world-class engineer and make all this money in their career and then not know where to put their money and how to manage it. Why do you think that is that they don't get that education?
Well, this might, maybe we create a whole episode over this, but I feel like a lot of that is lacking in our educational system.
100%. I agree with that.
And when I say that, I grew up in a small town. I raised my kids in a small town in southern Minnesota. And I even went to the school board and offered, this was probably 8-9 years ago, I'm willing to teach a course on fundamentals of investments 101. How much to contribute to a 401k, the concept of compound interest, all of those things are super important.
Yes.
But I just feel like we're not being taught that.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we do day in and day out. It's not what the engineer does. It's not what, the physician does. Or it's not, it's like you have to self-educate yourself in order to get the knowledge. And unfortunately, in this day and age, there's no lack of information.
Right.
But what's true, what's not true, where do I even begin? So to answer your original question, Kamie, I feel like it's overwhelming. Yeah. It's really overwhelming. And a lot of times people are just like, where do I even begin?
Yeah.
How do I sift through all of this complexity?
Yeah. And that's not us ragging on the education system by any means. It's just when I look at people my age too, I'm in my 30s. And over the last decade of my life, there's a lot of unintelligence when it comes to finances. I mean, we all go work kind of our butts off. And you're doing that so that you can thrive. Yeah. But when you don't know how to manage your money because you really haven't been taught, that's a big concern. I'm fortunate where I have a mother that is very well off when it comes to knowing how to manage finances. So I've utilized her, but seeing people that don't have that is concerning. And I'm sure you deal with a lot of people that really just don't have the education. But again, that's where you can hire people to help you out.
And that brings up a good point. I want to just mention this. So majority of our clients are in that 50 plus stage. Mm-hmm. I would say we got 20% that's maybe younger than 50. But for those of you that are watching this, I would encourage you to take some of these lessons and share them with your children or depending on your age, even your grandchildren, because what you just talked about your mom, I don't know how many kids actually have a mom like you that understands the importance of starting a Roth when you get your first job. I don't care, Kamie, if it's $100 a month, but just get started. Mm-hmm. And what we notice is when we help clients of ours, children, and they just get started and they get their first job, and even if it is putting away $100 a month or $200 a month, a couple of years goes by and they're just like, oh my gosh, I've already got $8,000. I mean, it's so then it becomes a little bit contagious.
Yeah, almost. It really is. And that's how it feels for me because I'm looking at some of those accounts and I'm like, okay, very thankful for my mother. That's for sure. Let's get to lesson number 5, Dan. What is it?
So lesson number 5 is if there was a chapter in this book that I think is probably the most important, it's lesson number 5.
Okay.
And that is navigate Social Security with wisdom.
Okay. Yes. All right. Why is that a lesson?
Social Security is a challenge. It's very, very complicated. And that is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings that people get when they retire. What people understand is at 62, I can start taking Social Security. So I think I paid into it. I'm going to start taking it at 62.
Right.
What they don't realize is it's significantly more complicated than that. There's basically several different factors that come into when you should start taking Social Security. And the number one thing is, when do I take it?
Right.
Why wouldn't I take it at 62? Well, part of the reason you wouldn't take it at 62 is if you delay it every single year based on current laws, you're going to get a 7% increase every year that you delay it from 62 up until your full retirement age.
Okay.
So it's like a guaranteed increase.
Yeah.
And some people might look at that, Kamie, and say, well, I'll just wait and get it when I'm at full retirement, which is wonderful, assuming you live longer.
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
Because, be honest, let's say that you take it at 62 and your neighbor takes it at 67. I mean, you've just given up 5 years of income stream. So there is a break-even point, and it varies based on how much you're going to get and delayed. But think about it this way. You've got 7% growing every year in your Social Security every year that you delay it. And again, not to get too granular because we'll talk about it in one of future episodes. But from your full retirement age, which for me is 67, that's the longest, right? But from age full retirement until age 70, it still compounds, but it's not at 7%, it's at 8%. So I think about it from the government standpoint. They're encouraging people to delay it because that's less money that they're having to pay out. But yeah, there's a break-even point there. But so that's one of the facets. So you start adding in a spouse in there and different income levels. And then it gets to the point where, should my spouse take it at 62 and should I delay mine till 67?
Sure.
Or should she take hers at 67 and I should take mine at 62? What's the differences? And I know I mentioned this on the first episode, but software has been such a game changer for us.
Yeah.
Because we can run these scenarios. We can say,
it's so nice.
If you take it at this age and you take it at this age, here's what the outcomes are. And we'll get into some of this discussion, but we talked earlier about life expectancies getting longer and longer and longer. And a lot of the decisions that we work with people center around that life expectancy. In other words, it seems fairly blunt, but I'll always say, tell me how long you live and we can tell you exactly what the best decision is. But we don't know that.
Yeah,
just because, probably a good thing, right?
Right. But just because I'm curious, do you look at that when you deal with clients? You look at their health and you ask them questions about, okay, how are things going health-wise?
It's a great question.
That's important.
Absolutely. We had just last week, we had a client of ours that got diagnosed with some very poor news on her health. Game changer.
Yeah.
So she's accelerating her retirement. The decision is, in her case, she does have an employer that does have a pension. And so we're going to model some different scenarios. And obviously it's a very, very delicate discussion, but it's a real discussion. And so we will model some scenarios that says, you know what, today you're 64 years old. What would it look like if something happened to you in 5 years or 10 years and we had you originally living to be 90? How does that change things? And, not to digress too much from the Social Security, but that factors into part of that. The pension factors into it.
And something simple with Social Security, this is so simple for people of all ages, but you can look up how much money that you've put into your Social Security. Just go online. You can just type in on Google, how much have I put into Social Security? You can log in and get that information. I don't think, because I do that, but I feel like a lot of my friends had no idea that even exists. But you can definitely monitor. It's your money that you've put in. So you can monitor that online.
And again, we'll get into this in another episode, but oftentimes I have people say to me, well, I don't even want to worry about put that into my equation because it probably won't be around. And of course, that's up for debate. We'll get into that in a future episode.
I was going to ask you some questions on that, but we're running out of time in this episode. So we'll get to that in future episodes because in our current political climate, there is a lot of information and a lot of misinformation out there. And so we can touch on some of that and how it impacts your finances. All right, we are now on lesson number 6. Dan, what is it?
Lesson number 6 is make taxes work for me,
yes,
not against me.
Very good. Very good. Taxes, also another scary topic for many people. And there's a lot of education that goes into taxes. You deal with that a lot. Are you extremely educated on taxes and how to better yourself?
Well,
by utilizing taxes?
You've made reference to me a couple of times as an expert. So I'm going to just say careful on the expert. That's a heavy task there. So taxes are very complicated.
Yes.
And what's really interesting is you talked about, demographics and people working longer, or I'm saying people are living longer and you're saying people are delaying getting married and having kids. I mean, we do see these shifts, but what's interesting is I look at our practice, and I would say probably 8 or 9 years ago, we made the shift from investments over to the planning side. So we're more of a planning-centric firm. We use Fidelity as our custodian, so all of our assets are held at Fidelity. We have access to, tens of thousands of choices, and, just not to necessarily give a shout out to Fidelity, but just we have access to world-renowned money managers. But I don't think that's the game today. I think the game today is how do you efficiently manage not just your cash flow, but how do you do it in a tax efficient way so that you're not losing a big chunk of it? And I feel like one of the things that I struggle with a lot is, and I make reference to it in the book itself, and it's basically, again, the book is a fable, but it's based on experiences that I've had with clients. But people are told, save and save and save and save when they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And a lot of people that have done a really good job at saving all of a sudden get to be 65 years old and they got all of this money in the retirement. We have kind of a candid phrase that we say, that's great that you've got this big 401k or 403b, but you realize you don't own it by yourself. And they'll be like, well, of course I own it by myself. And I'm like, no, it's jointly owned with the IRS.
Yeah.
Because you haven't paid tax on that money because it's all been pre-tax. So starting some of those things again when you're younger, that's really not a discussion you want to have with somebody when they're 55 to say, hey, have you looked at the Roth component inside your 401k?
Right.
But when you're in your 30s, that's a great discussion to have. And I don't want to continue to reiterate about the software, but we have separate software where we can create different scenarios and strategies. For you, Kamie, we can certainly crank out some numbers and say, I know you're putting away 10% pre-tax. And by the time that you're 65, that's going to be worth a lot of money. But just imagine a world where you actually took 5%, put in the Roth, pay the taxes now, you don't get the deduction, but now all of a sudden when you're 65, you have zero tax implications.
Yeah.
So again, not to go too deep on that lesson, but at the end of the day, that's really what we're talking about is what buckets do we pull from when you retire? Do we pull from some of those Roth monies or do we actually pull for some of the pre-tax monies? And how do we manage those tax brackets? That's really what lesson 6 is about.
Yes. And we will dig deeper into that because I think there is so much when it comes to the tax code and learning more about it and how it can benefit you or hurt you that can apply to people of all ages. That is for sure. All right. We are on our final lesson, lesson 7. It's all in this book. Again, Retire and Thrive. Dan wrote it and he has the lessons in here and a little bit of, it's a fun way of explaining it. He has these characters in this story and it's a fable, as he mentioned, and it's a really easy read and you can learn a lot from these lessons and we will dig deeper into them in all these episodes here on this podcast. But we are on our final lesson and it is 7. What is it?
And I know we're running up against time, Kamie, so I'll make this one a little bit more brief, but to have a bigger future, you must make today matter.
That makes sense. That seems absolutely correct. Why was that your final lesson in the book?
That was the final lesson because it is important that you focus on the here and the now, not necessarily 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And again, in the book, we kind of get into a little bit of more detail about why you do need to focus on today and some of the decisions you have today. And again, going back to my kids' scenario of, the decisions you make today do have consequences, good or bad.
Yeah. Being futuristic is a good thing, but also focusing on the now is important. And that will definitely impact your future. It's all about thriving. We are retiring and thriving on this podcast. Anything you'd like to finish with, Dan?
Looking forward to the next episode where we are going to dive into lesson number 1.
Okay, lesson number 1. We've touched on all these lessons, and now we're going to dig into each of them and different aspects of them. And we might have some offshoots and have separate episodes on topics that we feel are important and necessary, especially in today's climate, whether that be politically, financially, whatever. We've mentioned this a few times, but if you have any questions or comments or something that you're dealing with that you want some information on or some answers to, we are here for it. Dan has the answers for you, and we will look at some of those comments and maybe make a whole separate episode just on your topic if we feel that it is necessary. Again, we thank you for joining us. And if you have a loved one that is dealing with, maybe they're heading into retirement or they're having some struggles financially, please pass along this link. You can like and subscribe to our channel and pass along some of these posts because we are so excited about some of the information that we can share with you and hopefully educate you in different ways. All right, that's all from us.
Great. Thanks, Kamie.
That's all from us. Thank you, Dan. And thanks to you for joining us. We hope to see you next week.